economy, the way it was facing the crisis world over and in the country, we have to evaluate the finance bill, and as I had said also during the budget, against the background of the fact that the economy had taken a hit all over. Against that background, the finance minister and the government was saddled with a situation where there are reports of a huge number of people in India probably falling back below the poverty line due to the crisis. And therefore, raising resources through two methods, the direct taxes and the indirect taxes, had huge limitations. And against such limitations, the effort made by the government and the Honorable Finance Minister, I think, is praiseworthy. I would like to say that, sir, it is from these taxes which are collected directly or indirectly that the portion of it goes to the states as shareable, divisible taxes. So the goal of a finance bill, I think, should be to increase this pool. And how to increase this pool is not to chip away at it by various means. One of those means is increasing cess and surcharges. If you increase cess and surcharges, which are indivisible, it eats away at this shareable, divisible pool. If you have funds which are created out of the devolution, the taxes which have been collected for devolution purpose, then again it eats away at the bulk of the shareable, divisible taxes. Now, against such a situation and such a conviction, in the true spirit of cooperative federalism, it is actually necessary that this shareable pool has to increase. But what has happened? Cess and surcharges, which were 0.23 trillion in 2009-10, have increased to rupees 2.32 trillion, 10 times in 2019-20, an increase of 11.1% to 15.6% in 2020. In 2021-22, the cess and surcharge on 17 commodities will be roughly around 0.70 trillion. Hence, the total cess and surcharge are pegged at more than rupees 3 trillion. This is equivalent to 45% of the aggregate shared taxes. And therefore, after readjustment of cess and non-shareable excise, the divisible pool has been effectively reduced to 30%. The 41% recommended by the 15th Finance Commission is therefore a delusion. I'll give the figures. The centre has pegged tax revenue at rupees 22.17 lakh crore in the budget. Against that, the share of the states has been pegged at rupees 6.65 lakh crore, which is just 29%. As far as Orissa is concerned, the vertical devolution, if you look at the latest data, the total devolution to the states as a percentage of gross tax revenue has declined from 32.36% in 2020-21 budget estimates to 30.02% in 21-22. So if you look at our states at Orissa, which I have to refer to, I say that I can give the figures, I state these figures, that the devolution to Orissa has gone down from 1.50% of the gross tax revenue in 2021 to 1.36% of the gross tax revenue in 21-22. So there is a centralization of revenue. Now, this is one particular aspect which militates against actual or true meaning of cooperative federalism. The state is losing to the tune of rupees 4,673 crores every year due to the impact of the 15th Finance Commission. But the question was, a mention was made that the agriculture fund which has been created would be given to the APMCs and would be spent there. But the point is, would they be given without any conditionalities? Most of the leeway that is being given to the states are coming with conditionalities. Several of those conditionalities would probably not be one-size-fits-all kind of conditionalities, which should actually be left to the state governments to decide. You can take it in case of the renewable obligations. You can take it in terms of raising resources for electricity power sector reforms. In any case, there are always conditionalities. So the states have lost the leeway to actually generate resources. Now I'll come to the point relating to the direct taxes. So the most important thing in the direct taxes would be to increase the tax base. Now, what has been done? What has been done to increase the tax base? In our country, 130 crore of Indians, only 1.5 crore pay income tax. And those who pay tax, they have to earn a threshold amount of rupees 5 lakh if you take the standard deductions. But the problem is, India's per capita income is around 1.4 lakh. To put this in perspective, the average American pays a 22% income tax. The average Chinese pays 10%, the average Mexican pays 15%, and the average German pays 14%. Most nations in the world have an income tax threshold that is lower than their per capita income. India is a complete outlier. Therefore, there is a structural problem here. Unfortunately, I think this particular aspect has to be addressed, and unless this is addressed, our kitty of the direct taxes will not improve substantially, even in the years to come. I then come to the point relating to some specific points relating to the direct taxes, which has been mentioned in the finance bill. The equalization of levy. It is a good move, but I think it requires clarification whether financial services transactions, business-to-business transactions, non-profit businesses such as education, healthcare, etc., and intercompany transactions fall within the scope of this equalization levy. The depreciation on goodwill, this was a case which was given, this was a settled issue by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of CIT versus MIPS Securities, but this has been unsettled now by this finance bill by imposing by having this amendment in which it effectively overrules a taxpayer-friendly ruling of the Supreme Court. Similarly, in case of the much talked about restriction relaxation for senior citizens, if you read the fine lines, the procedural flaw in this change is that the interest income must be from the same pension-paying bank only, and the pension-paying bank must be notified by the government, and for claiming refund, if any, the return has to be filed. This actually brings in the rigor back to the senior citizen. This needs to be withdrawn. There is the question relating to faceless assessments. Really welcome development. The faceless e-assessments at various stages is probably unique in the world, and this is to be commended. But the point is, in tax administration, what is the cost? What is the cost of administering a tax? On the face of it, prima facie, it would appear that because of introduction of faceless transactions, the cost of administration or cost of collection of tax would have gone down. I would like to know whether any such assessment has been made as regards the cost of collection, the manpower savings, the time, decrease in time that has taken place. Now, the point here is, we have got data from CBDT which says that whatever cases were referred to them in this faceless transaction method, only 20% have been settled till now. So I do not really know whether this is giving the kind of dividends that the Honorable Sir, he will take care of it. Okay. So we do not know whether this is giving the kind of dividends that it was supposed to give. We were talking about, the Honorable Finance Minister in the Finance Bill has talked about data analytics. But the point is, data analytics would have value only if you have a large pool of data. Now, we know for certain that huge amount of data with the state governments is not being used by centralized agencies for analytics purpose or for collection of tax. All these have meaning in the context of the fact that our tax base is very less, and therefore we have to increase efficiency in tax administration. The interagency coordination for enforcement of taxes, I think that requires a relook, because even though the data between various agencies has improved, as I gave the example, the data between the center and the state's enforcement agencies is not being used. Another canon of tax regime or canon of taxation is stability. I do not really understand why Honorable Finance Minister missed this opportunity to completely migrate to the new regime of an exemption-free system that she had devised in the last budget. I think this was an opportune moment to fix it at that particular structure and follow through so that there would have been a stability in the direct tax system. The GPF, we talked about the EPF. I am also not very clear whether the General Provident Fund to which these government servants contribute to would be brought under this regime of a cap beyond which they will be taxed. The textile sector, sir, that requires a different kind of treatment, sir. It employs the second largest number of people in the country. Unfortunately, despite the input assistance that is being given to them, there is no tax concession on their products which are to be sold outside. It has to be thought of as a part of the creative economy of the country and ready for export basket, and therefore concessions had to be extended. I think Honorable Finance Minister would consider that. The climate change products and the SHG products. Sir, the self-help groups in our country have really taken off, particularly in our state under the leadership of Honorable Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik. The kind of products that they produce at a micro level, they need to be treated separately as far as taxation is concerned. Now I come to the indirect taxes. The Kar Vivad scheme, which was talked about and has been very successful in the direct tax regime, could actually be extended to the indirect tax regime, which is an opportunity which the Finance Minister could kindly consider. Sir, we'll take care, don't worry, sir.
No,
there is another one, there is another aspect relating to backstop facility that the Honorable Finance Minister has introduced. It's a brilliant kind of effort to shore up the corporate bond regime. But unfortunately, the guidelines which are being worked out have not come out. So it is not really clear whether the moral hazard issue that is probably involved in this kind of situation would be taken care of or not. On arbitration rulings, I think we have to make, as a country, we have to take a decision as to what our stand would be. In 2015, in 2017, and in now the recent amendments, we are actually nowhere as far as stability is concerned, and that is a cause of concern for any foreign direct investment. We have to have a view on this particular aspect. As far as disinvestment is concerned, the risk is huge. The risk is from a second wave of the COVID-19. The private investment also may have been crowded out due to this huge borrowings on the government side and by the state governments. And therefore, this is a risk which the Honorable Finance Minister has to take into account.
आपके 19 मिनट्स हैं पार्टी को, 14 मिनट्स आपने कंज्यूम कर लिया।
14 हुआ है ना?
14 मिनट्स आपने कंज्यूम किए।
हाँ, ठीक है। So, on the indirect taxes position, there is one more point that I would like to say. This is relating to replacing AAR with VAR. The authority for advanced rulings, consisting of 3 members, with chairman being a retired Supreme Court High Court judge, is being replaced by the Board of Advanced Rulings consisting of 2 members not below the rank of Chief Commissioner. However, it is unclear how the bar could qualify as a tribunal carrying out judicial proceedings in the absence of appointment of judicial members. Lastly, sir, I would like to say that the finance bill, while considering several aspects, had to also look at the equity issue. I have talked about this equity at length at various places, both inside the House and outside in print and electronic media. I was wondering if a tax could have actually been imposed on the very rich in the form of a COVID tax, which could actually have contributed to the shareable, divisible pool of the entire country, and that could actually have been shared with the states. And lastly, I think several things which are happening relating to the wholesale price index and the consumer price index, I think these need to be fixed too. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saab.